everyone. Welcome back to another Web3 Marketing Mastermind session. Really excited to be here today with some amazing panelists. We have Jay and Romain, and then Chuhan and myself are from the team running this event. So thanks so much for joining us. My name is Zaji, and I'm excited to see how this goes. So today we are talking about engaging non-English markets, and it's going to be a really interesting session learning from both the Chainlink side as well as the Avalanche side and hearing about these experiences. So I'll have each of you introduce yourself and share a little bit more about what you're building, and then we'll go from there if that sounds good. So Jay, why don't you kick it off?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me. So on my side, VP of Marketing at Ava Labs. Ava Labs is the company, one of the companies or one of the contributors for the Avalanche protocol, the layer one blockchain. One of the strongest value propositions is really sub-second transaction finality, meaning that the transactions actually fully settle on chain within a second. The other kind of secondary value propositions that are worth noting are that security is high with higher validator set. We're currently at about 1,300, and also can really scale just any type of application using what we call subnets, and maybe we can dive into that later. But in addition to that, really have been in the space professionally as a marketer since 2015. So Zaji and I think know each other from at least those communities. And was prior to Avalanche, I was actually in the Ethereum space for about maybe I guess like 5 years or so. So really excited to be here. I think the perspective that I tend to bring is how do you actually maneuver marketing community in this wild space that we're all in, and not necessarily the one to know all the right things to do, but I certainly made plenty of mistakes for everybody that's tuning in, and so hopefully you guys can avoid them.
It's always good to learn from experience, for sure.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks, Jay. And then Romain, why don't you jump in?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ajay. So I work for Chainlink Labs since about 7-8 months. I come from the traditional finance, so something totally different from Jay. I started as a community member, so that's how I discovered the blockchain. And I think that's interesting to have both sides, because I was a community member involved in the French community. So it was really important to have non-English communities when I started to deep dive into the blockchain industry. And I'm really excited to work for Chainlink Labs, the Oracle standard available on more than 14 different blockchains and with different services. And I think that we will stay focused on the community engagement. And really happy to see some community members in the attendees. So thanks for joining.
Amazing. Thank you. Great. So good backgrounds to get started. So I think it'd be good to kick things off. Would love to know, how the current industry has affected your strategies going into maybe 2023. How are you thinking about community and especially about global markets going into the new year? So feel free to kick things off, either of you.
With the strategy, I think the main perhaps obvious shift is really just being much more drilled down and focused towards kind of like the mid-bottom funnel, maybe. Not to say that brand awareness is not important, but I think in any industry, when budgets start to tighten for a variety of reasons, you start to really figure out what actually matters in the short term and what is maybe like a nice to have. And so I think that's where we're at right now. My philosophy always is to have that outlook through and through, regardless of bull or bear markets, for what it's worth. But sometimes when markets are good and when sentiments are high, it's kind of tough to kind of reel that down. But I remember even like when I joined my previous role, it really was right when the ICO bear market started. It was, I think, like the day or something crazy like that. So worst timing. But what I tend to find was really amazing about that experience is when you push content out or you have campaigns, whether it's community or marketing, doesn't matter, anything outward facing, you can actually see what really works and what doesn't really work. And that clarity is so refreshing. And so really take that as a blessing, I think, and really understand like, okay, it didn't work because it really didn't work, not because of any other reason. And if it really worked, it actually is something that people really care about and really want. And working, could be defined in a variety of ways. I tend to find, the best recommendation is something along the lines of like the standard KPIs, OKRs that are aggressive towards your business goals in blockchain, I think it's and Web3, I think it's a balance of on-chain metrics as well as marketing metrics. And then hopefully you can maximize attribution or kind of like the visibility towards your customer segment or your target audiences as best as possible. I think there's never a time where you're going to have the full like granular picture, but at least using proxies or really just like shining, what I like to say, like shining the flashlight into the dark patches so you can actually see a little better. That's really, I think, how we're kind of looking at things. But as opposed to kind of the channels and how we're adjusting things, aside from the branded versus not comment, I think it's really more or less the same, just maybe a little bit tighter.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And like you said, regardless of where the industry is at, it's always important to just keep building, moving forward, focusing maybe on more specific areas that you know you can grow during this time. So that's really great. Romain, any thoughts from the Chainlink side?
No, I think that's really important to be focused on something important. See, if your community is focused on building something really interesting, something long term, you don't have to be affected by that kind of news. That's something that has always been a question for us. We want to have builders, we have to have people interested by the technology and not investors, traders, and people focus on short-term interest. So I think, yeah, that's really important to stay focused on the long term. And at the end, we will be there and focus on our main targets.
Yeah, no, that's great. And as you do build communities, you know, how are you doing this with non-English markets? Do you do it through different Telegram groups, Discord? Like, would love to dive into what that actually looks like. And then if you each want to share like challenges as well as amazing things that have come out of this, that'd be great. So maybe Romain, we'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. So we are really active on Twitter, Telegram, and Discord. I think that Discord is really focused on English and more technical stuffs. We have something else for some other communities, but I think that if you want to talk about Chainlink, you can find a lot of information on Twitter and Telegram. We have a lot of Telegram chats, I think more than 20 different groups in different languages. So we try to be worldwide to be able to reach everybody, because it's sometimes difficult to discover a new technology like the blockchain and having to work with for a language that you don't understand perfectly. So that's why I think that Telegram is the first step to discover the blockchain in your own language. Twitter is a good space, and Discord if you need more technical stuffs. I think something really like a big challenge for us is to, when you create like 20 different groups, you have to be active on 20 different groups. And that's something really important. If you open something, if you create something new, you have to do it right. You have to stay focused on that. And that could be something different. Instead of just having one main chat with a lot of messages, if you have 20 different groups, you have 20 different conversations. You have to deal with scams, with everything else in every group. So I think that's the main challenge that we have right now.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. It's like, you don't want to just launch 80 different community groups and then not be able to actually do a good job managing them. So that's really great advice. Jay, maybe some thoughts on that and how Ava Labs is doing this.
Yeah, I totally agree with Romain's points there. I think those are challenges that we all face. It's not unique to necessarily one particular project or organization. The way we're structured, we kind of use the community team in a hub and spoke way. So the hub is really kind of the core, like what I call HQ, not that it really has a location or anything, but really the kind of the core strategists who really originate a lot of the higher level execution plans. It's like a good example would be, let's say you have a partnership marketing opportunity with Adapt deploying on Avalanche. And then you have to understand, okay, what are the priorities? How do we measure success? All the different things that you have in like a standard marketing plan. Then when you go to that, then you can kind of look outwards and saying, what channels do we have at our disposal? Community is just one of many channels. Others would be like the traditional channels, such like search, paid, social, things like that. And with community, I think what we've done really well is to really get the word out across the globe in a localized manner. So I think localization and translation is really, really, really important. I think a thing that we've gotten a lot better at, but still probably have room for improvement is really this two-way relationship with the community managers and the community leads. We of course have certain hypotheses that we push out or that inform our strategy that we then end up pushing out, but we also need that kind of counter feedback to then understand, okay, like this is more of an obvious example, but one that I can kind of use is go to China and the channels are certainly not necessarily Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn. It might be more like WeChat, and it might be more like other messaging apps. And how do you actually get access to that? How do you actually grow that? How do you make it work for you? I think that's what we've done decently well, but we want to push that further. I think this next phase is really understanding, okay, how do we segment our audience a little bit better? Right now, we kind of, for lack of a better phrase, corralled people into these pens just out of convenience. And luckily, I think it's worked fair in a very successful way, I guess, all things considered. But at a certain point, a good example is Telegram, right? Like if you have 60,000 members, how are you possibly engaging all 60,000 of those members? You probably aren't. You're probably only engaging just like a 5%, 1% even. So I think that's when we just want to start to, again, the segmentation is like, could be technical, non-technical, or even more granular developers in Web3, developers in Web2, users and traders in other buckets as well. And then really figure out, okay, what are the pain points that we're seeing right now? One example is the constant feed of Telegram, the constant feed of Discord. I personally can't really manage all of that. And so if people that are working in the space can't manage it, I'm sure people who aren't working in the space where it's not their full-time job have kind of difficulties managing it. So one example that we actually just launched like 15 minutes ago is really good timing. It was not purposely done, is the Avalanche Forum. The forum is such a simple tool. It almost feels like we kind of went full circle in our strategy a little bit, like trying to find the most innovative, cutting edge platforms. And at the end of the day, the thing that's tried and true is really what's working. And the reason why the forum is so unique to the developer and research community is because you have static conversation. You can actually come back to that page, and that line of thought is probably not going to be bumped down by 1,000 other pings that are totally unrelated to that conversation topic. I think Reddit used to be a really good platform for that, but I think crypto kind of like chases it, brings in a lot of noise, and then kind of like leaves it a little bit like dried up a little bit or kind of dead. Discord similarly, I think with NFTs, it seems. So just really understanding, again, how to segment, making a reason to return is, I think, the hardest part. And then hopefully you start slow and start to build this core community who then you can leverage for your kind of resourcing and also your efforts. So then you can actually have a more performant, scalable operation.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, feedback, and I think it makes a ton of sense. And then, yeah, congrats on the launch. That's awesome. Is the forum something that you guys have built internally, or are you using like a discourse or something? I think it's just an interesting launch.
Yeah, so it's on forum.avax.network.
Nice.
It's just a discourse white label solution. Yeah. I think what we're doing as a strategy is really starting small and starting focused. If we have too many channels, then all of a sudden people get overwhelmed, and we also don't necessarily know what's important to some people. So I think the next step really is the conversation that we're having now is localizing content and having multilingual support. For now, we're just keeping it again, focused on English just because that's what we're used to, at least on the HQ side. And then as we kind of build that out, then maybe the China team might come in and say, hey, by the way, forum is an amazing idea. That intention makes total sense. But actually what makes more sense in the Chinese market is whatever that may be. So if anyone has that thought, like, let me know.
Yeah, no, and same thing on the Chainlink side. We do have a team in China. We have team members all over the place. So we're the same way, start things maybe with like an English base and then grow from there and see which localized communities can jump in. And that does bring me into my next question, which is, how do you decide which non-English communities to prioritize? Are there certain languages that you guys have seen are bigger in your audiences? So yeah, maybe Romain jump in and then Jay.
Yeah, sure. I think it's dependent on your project. If you're like a small project just launching, you have to stay focused on your own country and your own language. I think that's something that Chainlink made really good in the past few years, is that we make in-person meetups where people can meet together, they can talk together, and that's something that you have to keep for your community. And if you don't have any employee or community member in the area, it's difficult to be really focused on that region. So if you start something, just stay focused on your own region or country. And I think that right now for Chainlink, we have hundreds of thousands of community members. We are in different regions. We can see quite easily which are the main communities. We have people here in the attendees from the Spanish communities. I think the Spanish and the Turkish communities were really important for Chainlink in few years, because they are really interested in our technology, and they were really active in the main English chat. So if you see something, someone asking in the chat, do you have a specific chat in Spanish, or how can I learn more in Spanish? That's a really good point to create something for this language. And then if you want to start something from zero and you say, okay, we want to expand, but we don't know where, I think it's really important to know where is your community, because it's quite impossible to say, okay, we will start in this country if you have no idea, nobody there. It's really impossible. So just try to know your community, maybe creating some pool in the or survey in the main chat to know where they are, if they are interested in doing something for their own country, for their own region. And that could be a great start to create something new, but to be sure that people are interested into this region.
Yeah, totally. And like you said, it's important also from the community side. If you want to see a change, like voice it. We do need those champions, right? Who are saying, hey, like I would love a Spanish version of this, etc. Because the team won't know if you don't say it. So yeah, Jay, maybe you want to add to that.
Yeah, I think that we have a similar line of thinking there. Just really like follow the analytics and metrics if you have that at your disposal. We initially were picking regions that kind of the combination of what you said, Romain, like we have community advocates or employees that can handle that that region or language. And then the other one is, as you kind of start to push out content and campaigns out into the wild, you can actually look at certain data and metrics on the marketing side and really see where the countries are most popular. I think the last piece that's unrelated to marketing metrics is more on the on-chain metrics, and that also shows a fair amount of signals as well. So not necessarily as like clear cut, but things like where nodes are being run, where a lot of the exchanges have liquidity, all these types of signals. But at the end of the day, these are all things that minimize the leap within the leap of faith. So it's not like you always have absolute certainty. So you kind of have to take that plunge eventually. And so I think the advice is really not to get too fixated on like, hey, this is the ideal choice. You just kind of have to run with it sometimes.
Yeah, no, definitely. Maybe a bit of a gut feeling plus analytics. So also, oh yeah, go ahead.
I would just maybe add something about the advocates and the most active community members. So at Chainlink Labs, we call that advocates, but it's like ambassadors or some other words. It's really interesting to have the most active community members that can help you providing translations, helping managing the chats. And I think that you can create a new community, maybe with one or two really motivated advocates, community members that can manage something alone. And I think that's really difficult to find people who are interested in new project and have time to do that as a volunteer. But if you can find that kind of people, it's really important to work with them because they can really make a lot of things for you.
Yeah, no, totally. I was just talking to an advocate for Venus protocol, and she was saying like she's translating blogs, she's like, doing Twitter spaces, all these things. And so if you can find really motivated people, which I know Chainlink, we have a ton of really engaged advocates, then they can become an extension of the community team, which is really important to add to the community. Well, great. Are there some common misconceptions when it comes to engaging non-English communities that maybe you guys have seen? you'd like to change in the industry?
Maybe not a misconception, but things that I used to see, and we've done plenty of these too, and I think sometimes you just kind of have to do it, but incentivization with money or tokens is not necessarily a strategy, but a tool. That's kind of like a really key distinction that I tend to want to make, especially in our space, because it's always like, oh, well, let's grow the community. It's like, oh, okay, well, let's throw money at the problem. It's like, yeah, well, certainly you're going to get acquisition, but you're not going to necessarily guarantee or maximize engagement. And I think acquisition is great, right? But it's also a short-term win as opposed to long-term. And so really just understand how best you can integrate that to maximize that long-term success. Ways, simple ideas would be like, if there is an incentivization mechanism, is there a way to actually guarantee higher quality people that are actually aligned to those values? Is there a way for people to stay? Maybe there's kind of like points of friction to get to that reward, maybe on the reverse suggestion, to make sure that people that actually go through those hoops are the ones that actually care about what's actually happening. At the end of the day, like, really, I think the incentive, again, shouldn't, maybe the thought process is like, think about the strategy first and then add the incentive to kind of boost the strategy. It's like the Uber model. Uber model is interesting because everyone needs transportation in some way, somehow. So it's kind of this product that is likely going to be used. But even then, they're still having issues with stickiness and engagement because of competition. How do you actually differentiate your product? So I think they had differentiation with the legacy infrastructure, which was like regular yellow cabs and taxis and things like that. But I don't know if they thought ahead and figured out, okay, do we have a value add against the people that we're competing within the disruptors category? And I think it's seemingly okay, because the startup cost to launch a worldwide ride sharing network is probably really high. So I think they probably analyze that. But in crypto, I think the barrier to entry is a little bit lower. So really just understand what the value add there is. And if there is no value add, maybe revisit that, figure out how you can create that value add. And then the token concept is super easy to execute. It's arguably the easier part of the whole picture here.
Right. But figuring out where it all ties together is important. And like Romain said, you can't do everything on a volunteer basis forever either. So you do need an incentive program, but you don't want to just have it all be run just by the incentives. Like, there has to be a balance.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Romain, anything from the Chainlink side on that?
Yeah, I will not make too long on that point. I think that some people could think that if you are able to reach people in English, you can reach a lot of people, because if someone is in the blockchain space or in the blockchain industry, they are able to learn and speak and understand everything in English. But I think that's not the case, and that's not what we want to reach. Maybe for the moment, the blockchain space is quite close with only projects using the blockchain. But if we want to reach like the Web2 companies that can integrate Chainlink or the blockchain technology, we will have to reach everybody, even the ones who don't speak English. And I think that's why we need people, and that's why we need to reach people in other languages, just to be able to reach everybody, and not only the one who are able to understand the tech or the one who made that kind of study and speak English.
Yeah. And I think too, it's coming down to also to speaking the language right back with them, right? Like, I take calls in Spanish sometimes with teams that only speak Spanish, and they appreciate that so much, and they're more willing to integrate the tech because we've made the effort to connect with them. And so it really is finding the balance between English and other languages too. Okay, great. Are there maybe some experiences you want to share on this front that have been great? Maybe like Romain, some cool things you've done with advocates. Jay, anything Ava Labs has done internationally that you want to share that has been either exciting and that you'd love to share with everyone? I'll let Romain go first, and then Jay can think about it.
Yeah, I think that's something really important, is to stay focused on some specific things, not to do too many things in the same time. And I think that's what we are working with the advocates, is that we have some community members that do a lot of things for us. It's important to work with them to say, okay, now the focus is to make translations about that kind of topics. So taking will be launched next week for Chainlink. So it's important that we have that translations in different languages. So we have to be focused on that. And maybe next year we want to start with some meetups in that kind of industry. And I think that's something really important, is to be able to guide them. And we are working on that with the advocates. And I think we are in the good way. And something that could be difficult is to find the most interesting topic or the direction where you want to go, because you involve a lot of time and you're focused on something that could be something wrong. And yeah, I think that's something important. Choosing the great region, if you want to launch a new language, to be sure that you can afford and use sometimes to manage this new community. And if you don't have any advocates or community members that can help you doing that, take time to choose the one that will help you. It's important to find someone that is interesting to do it in the long term, because it's really difficult to choose and to find new people that can help you. And it's not interesting at all to involve new people every 2 weeks to introduce the process and to help them doing the first translation or doing the first meetups, instead of having someone that can help you during a few years, someone that you can trust and that can do a lot of things alone.
Yeah, so it's a long-term game, and it is really hard to train people to do this. So you do want to try to find those key individuals in the community and help them grow. Yeah, and then Jay, anything from Ava Labs and some stuff that you guys have been up to?
Yeah, I think the things that were really cool, and I hope to stretch this out further, is very similar to what Romain was saying in terms of the non-Ava Labs employed or contracted team. But really that one layer about outwards, or even 2 layers, one being the super evangelized kind of early adopters. Maybe the second layer is really kind of the relatively new community members who are fairly evangelized as well and really loyal to the brand. And so, I mean, I have like a few anecdotes, but one that comes to mind is, I know the French community, especially those that are based in Paris, super, super, super long-term fans. Even in the beginning, it was kind of difficult to really understand what to do for them and really understand like how to actually scale when we're only like a team of 15, or this was like years ago. But even then, I think the energy was really high. And I think what really helped is community has 2 components, more or less, the online and the offline component. And the online component, it is actually very powerful as long, regardless of the distance that we have between our screens. Of course, there needs to be kind of that human interaction, but that's more like the, I don't know, kind of like the final phase, perhaps. And so what we're seeing in that community is people are actually going out and producing events on their own. And that's incredible. Not even sponsored by us. Hopefully we can do that and have a program that really supports them in a really meaningful way. But for now, I think it was kind of like bursting at the seams maybe. And people were like, you know what, like, I'm really passionate about Avalanche. I'm really passionate about Web3. I just want to meet like-minded people, and it doesn't matter. We'll pull resources together, and maybe even I might front the cost for like quick pizza and beer or something, and just call it a day. And so we've seen that a lot from the Parisian community. We saw something out of the Portland community in the US. The Portland guys, they organized like a basketball tournament and really like wanted to just make it like a fun hangout, I think. And that's, to me, so cool. Like you don't really have that in Web 2, I think. I don't know, maybe like an extreme example is you don't have like a massive insurance company and all of a sudden everyone's like, you know what, I love like this massive insurance company. Let me just do like a drinks with the community members. I don't know, maybe it's not as like apples to apples of a comparison, but to see that come to life in a pretty professional setting or professional context is cool. So hopefully the next phase is really, again, to empower those people, reward those that do take initiatives, and even expand on their capabilities further, and then hopefully also then get a better two-way feedback loop going, so then we can better understand, okay, like what is actually happening out there. You guys know, this obscure town in the middle of nowhere better than anyone else in the core HQ team, and so what's actually happening there? How are people using crypto? And I think the closing thought here is like, I always say with our industry, a lot of people that join, especially on the professional front, are usually come from pretty strong backgrounds, socioeconomically at least. And it's because our industry is so risky for anyone who doesn't have a relatively strong socioeconomic background. It's highly prohibitive. And so really understanding the true, like what makes people tick on the ground. And I think that's the gap that we're trying to close as an industry. And I think we've gotten much closer, but there's also plenty of work to be done there.
Yeah, having those boots on the ground really helps tie it all together. Romain, were you going to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that's really important because sometimes you're focused on what you are doing in your own country or your own region. Maybe if you are only based in the US, you think that's the way to do the things. And maybe you just speak with someone who's based in, I don't know, Venezuela or in Africa, in another country in Africa. And you realize that you can do something different that have much more impact than what you think is right in your own country. And this feedback can only come from the community because sometimes you are only focused on your own things, and having feedback from someone else is really, really important.
Yeah. Acknowledging the customs of that region and that culture as well. I know too, like at DevCon, it was really cool. A lot of the events had like customary food from Colombia. There was like sancocho, like a soup, like it's kind of cool because then you do tie in that culture and you make the locals feel like you're acknowledging that, and you're not just coming in as a Western culture and doing your own conference. You're actually combining the cultures together. So
yeah, and
fun.
one quick thing to add to that too, I'm glad you brought that up, is on our event strategy, I guess that kind of like touches community in some sense or has overlap. We actually want to pull that out as much as possible. I know you guys have the same outlook with conferences, really want to shake the kind of hotel lobby conference model on its head a little bit, and also booking the same like 10 talking heads. It's not that entertaining, or maybe that's not the right word, but it's not that interesting, right? Like, and also perhaps entertaining, but and so to really promote diversity from our side as kind of the people with power in our industry, the people that are originating a lot of these outward facing initiatives, I think it's really important for us to kind of lead by example. And so that's really where like our Avalanche Summit last year, that was where I remember one of the things that I was trying to figure out was, how do we actually promote diversity? There's a bunch of different ways to promote diversity. The three things that we look at loosely is gender diversity, ethnic diversity, and then socioeconomic diversity. In that order, not because any one is more important than the other, but it's just seemingly kind of like not easy, but the more straightforward is just having like a few options. And then as you kind of go down, it gets a little bit more complex. And what was amazing is we didn't even have like what's it called, like a quota or anything. We just were saying, hey, let's really put our best foot forward, book some of the amazing speakers that are maybe not as represented. Maybe they haven't been given the opportunity, still really amazing speakers, but maybe not ones that you see again on those kind of like conference circuit floating heads, I guess. And what ended up happening as the outcome is, we didn't really know this until CoinDesk did a report on it. And we found that I think 50% of the speakers at Avalanche Summit, out of about like 450-ish speakers, I think, or 400 speakers, I can't remember exact number, were women. And that was incredible because you then you kind of like show the producers who make up excuses saying, hey, they're just not there. And it's like, well, I don't know if that's true. They're definitely there. They're somewhere. You just have to look for them. And that applies with like the ethnic diversity too. And then also to your point, Zaji, about like the food, it's like, we don't also want to, we have a lot of Americans on our team. We don't want to necessarily go to Barcelona and be like, all right, here's the food. Here's like a chicken Caesar wrap and a hamburger or something. It just feels so inauthentic, and it's not why we're in this global industry. And so that's where I think we can kind of lead and buy us more time with some of the kind of like outward facing initiatives like events. And that's what we're really trying to continue to promote, and maybe even think of better ways to improve on what I just spoke on too.
Yeah, no, it's all about the intention placed behind, the initiatives. And I think if you put it out there, then you will receive that, what you're putting out to the universe, you will receive back. Great. Well, I want to move into a few questions so that I am mindful of everyone's time. So I have a question from Alicia. She's asking, how do you measure conversion from events in foreign countries to whatever metric your project desires? For example, TVL. Sometimes it is a massive spend for sometimes an unquantifiable return. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can start because I talk about that today. We started the community in Brazil that speak Portuguese. And I think it's difficult to see with the TVL in detail, but we can say that we started a few weeks, maybe 2 months ago, and we see that some projects based in Brazil discover Chainlink. And if we didn't open any community there, they will still looking for price feeds. They still don't know about Oracle. And I think that's really important to jump into this community, create something, and then you will be able to see, okay, we had maybe 10 integrations from this country. It's difficult to say, okay, we were able to secure X amount. But you can see that you attract more community members. You see that you can attract more projects. So you have more visibility and you can help and secure more projects. So yeah, it's difficult to say, okay, we had 10 meetups, 500 attendees, and 5 projects. That's okay, that's cool, that's good in the short term. But I think that in the long term, once again, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So we will be able to see that, okay, we had so many new projects from this region. Started the day we created this community.
Yeah, it's little steps before sometimes you can get to that quantifiable number. Jay, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, so this question is exactly what we addressed or tried to address. I think it's an ever long process, but with our events starting this summer. And so one of the things is really like, how do we measure and how do we actually then look ahead and improve and compare notes with what we did last year versus the future years. And so I think the suggestion to take the other angle is really use marketing proxies or marketing metrics as proxies. And so like some things, I have it up, that's why I can read it off, but like think about attendee count. What's your expected attendance? What's your expected budget? And then also figure out what your cost per person is. That isn't necessarily cost per acquisition, but that's cost per potential acquisition. Now, if you want to figure out how to acquire, then maybe gate it with like email forms or some follow-up form that is targeted to your goal. So Bogota is a really good example. Bogota, we threw a social event. It was a party with a DJ, and a lot of the questions that we get all the time internally and externally is like, what's the business case for a party effectively? And I think face value, it does look like that, right? Like the question is actually totally valid and I exactly know where it's coming from. But at the end of the day too, there are ways to create meaningful connections with each other, and social events is just one very valid way to do that. And when you think about meaningful connections in marketing terms, that's basically lead generation. How do you actually get people down the funnel a little bit more? And so when we threw our Bogota event, it was really saying, okay, well, we're technically competing with Ethereum, so we might get lost in a lot of the Ethereum events. And so maybe we just want to play something a little bit more fun and lighthearted, and something that anyone would want to go to, no matter if they're anti-avalanche or not. It shouldn't matter. And at the end of the day, then when you actually start to figure out some of those proxies, then you can figure out, okay, well, who are the VIP list? Who are the organizations that actually showed up? Then qualify those even further, and then actually highlight maybe like digital marketing impressions and all these things. And so at a certain point, again, this is only like 80-90% of the puzzle. And I think the rest is just never going to be solved because of just how like attribution and events work. But at least you have something. And when you go back to your finance department or you go back to your leadership team, you can actually say, hey, like if you actually quantify, the per person cost, let's say it's like $50 a person. Well, $50 a person for potential acquisition, if you have all these major brands, all these different qualified leads, all the impressions, click-throughs, whatever it may be, follows that came from that digital campaign, then all of a sudden that $50 a person looks a less bad than just throwing a event with drinks and food and things like that. So we're trying to improve that even further. That's kind of step one. The step two is usually using a system that really can qualify these people a little bit better. But also I think the challenge with our space is privacy is a huge concern. We value privacy really highly, and you guys do as well. And so really trying to balance that is also kind of a challenge on the operations side.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, I know for events, we try to, make sure we know how many people attended and everything, but at the same time, we do want to value if you don't want to share, more anonymity, that's totally fine as well. But it is hard because that's more of a Web3 thing than a Web2 thing. And then what you were saying, Jay, I think is important is, figuring out what type of event to throw at different things. Like maybe it's a hackathon makes more sense in certain instances, whereas something where, like you said, maybe the Ethereum community was heavy, then maybe more of a social event makes more sense. So from a startup perspective, it's all about the circumstances that you're in. Well, thank you, Alicia, for that question. I'll move on to the next one. This is very specific, so not sure if any of you feel comfortable. Maybe Chuhan, maybe you want to jump in here. I'm going to mess up your name. I'm so sorry. Vaucher asked, how would you start a Chinese community? So he really wants to know specifically to China. Are there some specific steps that a startup should take? So I don't know, Chuhan, even if you want to jump in, I know you're from our China team, maybe like different apps that people are using out there and things like that.
Yeah. The first question I have is, for some reason I didn't see this question in the Q&A session, but I guess the answer is the Chinese people do use different channels for accessing different news or chats. So as Jay mentioned earlier, in the Chinese market, people are more intended to use like WeChat. It's like a super app where people can access different info and also like chat. So I guess like in order to create a Chinese community, we firstly need to know two tools that are popular in this community where people can access info without using like a VPN. So which are like WeChat and Weibo. So those are two types of platforms. And WeChat is kind of like a combination of Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp. So it's like a super app. And then Weibo is more like the Chinese version of Twitter. So I guess if you want to create Chinese community, we should probably start with those two platforms. And then another thing is, I think we really need to have like a native speaker in the team to manage this community, because they definitely know better than other non-Chinese speakers for spreading different news in the community. Also, maybe Romain knows this. So for the Chainlink Chinese community, we have like a community manager, and he onboarded a few different local advocates to share news or do translations. So I think that's also helpful. Maybe those advocates don't speak really good English, but what we are trying to do is our community manager will be the bridge to help them understand some to help them understand some English content, and they can do the work and spread the word in Chinese. So I guess that's something we can start. The first suggestion is to find the platform, and the second is probably find a native speaker to help. Yeah, I guess that's my answer.
Thank you, Chuhan. That was great. That's great. Unless anybody else has anything to add, I think maybe we move on to the next question, because I know we're running over on time. But yeah, thank you, Chuhan. So this next one was asking, how do you turn around after a negative streak and create a successful marketing campaign? So this attendee had an event with unlocking tokens through a contract that didn't go as well as they were hoping for, but they want to start, a series of successful marketing campaigns. How do you do that after a tumultuous start? We are integrating Chainlink, so we do have some good partners, but any other advice from there?
I think the quick answer there is like really identify that problem that's being highlighted, make sure that's actually addressed, and then figure out if there's a way to fix it with the past holders, I guess. And if there isn't, then you might have to rely on clarity and communications on basically admitting that a mistake was made, and also owning up to that. And I think really figuring out how best you, number one, ensure that mistake will never be made again. And then number two, what you're going to do to maybe offset that somewhere. If it's a replacement of funds, that's much easier. If it's something else, I think you're still going to get people that are probably never going to be a fan again, which is okay. And that's something that you just have to accept. And ultimately it relies, it kind of is like PR comms led first. Really, messaging is really important. And then at the end of the day, you just, to earn trust, like with anything, right? Like, you're not going to earn trust just because you put out a tweet that says, I'm sorry. You're going to earn trust once you start doing good things. And that's when you have to do multiple or many, many good things following that to really follow through on your promise. And I think that's really the best rec. And I think everyone's been in similar situations, at least with like negative outcomes.
Yeah. And not everyone's always going to be on your side. So you just have to work with it.
Yeah.
All right, I know we're close to time, so let me just ask the last question from Lynn. Thank you, Lynn. What are the major responsibilities you give as guidelines for advocates to follow? Is it translations, hosting offline events? She's looking for a little bit of guidance. Maybe Romain.
Yeah, sure. So I'm managing this advocates program. I was an advocate for Chainlink during about 18 months before joining the company as an employee. So I know how to work with that kind of points. I think the most important thing is to let the advocate doing what they love. If you find someone who loves your project and are time to be involved, and it's someone who is like a little bit shy, don't want to talk in front of hundreds of people, don't ask them to make the meetups. You can do anything as an advocate. You can do translations, you can do in-person meetups, you can do offline meetups, you can do AMA on Telegram, you can edit videos on YouTube. We have a YouTube community channel too. If you want to make something else, you can do everything you like. So that's the thing I say every time someone wants to join the advocate program, is just do something that you like, because you will stay longer, you will stay motivated, and just give them the opportunity to do what they want. And if they have new ideas, try to help them reaching this target. And you can find some really interesting steps coming from the advocates. I have so many advocates that say, okay, maybe we should do that. We tried, we did it, and it was a success. So they can do everything they want that can help you. Just don't say, okay, you just have to make translations.
Yeah. Try to work with them.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. Try to work with the talents you have. Well, thank you, everyone. I would love to keep going, but I know we're over time already by a few minutes. So thank you so much, Jay and Romain. Really, this was really insightful. And if the community has more questions, feel free to send them to us in the Discord, and we can always follow up with these two. But any closing things you want to just say before we head out?
No, I think maybe just show the forum a little bit more. So forum.avx.network if you guys are curious on what that looks like and what it could become. Perfect. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Romain and Chuhan. I appreciate everyone being here, and the recording will be available in the Discord. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Appreciate it.